All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to discuss a very, very fascinating subject tonight. I think often these, as we've said, these supporting actors or actresses in the Torah are some of the most fascinating personalities. And tonight we're going to actually divide into two parts. We're going to talk about we'll talk about the incident with Dena, but we'll talk about Dena. We'll also talk about the reaction from Yaakov to Shimon and Levi. Both of them, I think, are fascinating chapters in the Torah. This is one of the more tragic and traumatic episodes in the Torah. It's one of the least understood, I think, as well, and we'll try to dissect and discuss the issue of Dena. And by the way, I want to dedicate this year to the memory of another Dena Brilliant, a wonderful friend of ours who passed away several years ago, and always think about her when we read in this Parsha that revolves around this, or one of the main subjects revolves around Dena. This is the only incident of sexual abuse anywhere in the Torah. So anywhere in the Chumash, let's say. We have also the famous story of Amnon and Tamar, which also is about sexual abuse. But in the Chumash itself, I think this story stands out, and we'll say a few words about that later on. I think we know the story, the basics of the story, that Dena is abducted, some want to say seduced, to come out of her home and raped by Shechem. Finally, she is going to be rescued by her family, led by Shimon and Levi, who will wipe out the town, wipe out Shechem in order to free her. And we'll take note of Yaakov's troubled reaction to what his sons do, although he never actually condemns the attack itself. And we'll come back to that. But first, I want to talk about the story of Dena. She is the only girl among 13 children in Yaakov's family. But even that she is a girl, that's not so simple, because again, looking at all the commentaries and factoring in the Midrashim, etc., the Gemara, we know that she was meant to be a boy. That is, when Leah became pregnant after having 6 boys already, so she prayed that this child, this fetus, would not be a boy but a girl, because she wanted to take pity on her sister Rachel, because she had this prophetic understanding that there would be 12 tribes. The handmaidens, Zilpah and Bilhah, had 2 each. She had 6, that's 10. And if she has another boy, well, then that means Rachel will only have 1 of the tribes, which would make her, in a sense, less than their own handmaidens. Therefore, she prayed, and the Gemara discusses, is this a prayer, a tfilat shav? You're not supposed to pray for something which you know can't come true. I'm not sure today almost anything can come true, but it has to be realistic. And so the Gemara discusses that and basically says that there is a certain period early in a pregnancy where the fetus has the option to go either way. And she prayed that this child, which was meant to be a boy, would in the womb switch and become, the chromosomes would develop that it would be a girl and not a boy. And therefore she named this child Dena, which means to judge. And essentially she was judging the situation and saying, it would be a chesed for my sister if this child would be a girl instead of a boy. So I can suggest that Dena may have been the first transgender that the Torah records, because she was meant to be a boy and she turned out to be a girl. And there's every possibility that she knew about this. And I suggest that psychologically, this definitely had an effect on Dena. Is she a male? Is she a female? Well, she was meant to be a male, but she became a female. And maybe this is why, to some extent, she may have strayed from the normal family behavior and doing something that was out of character for the children of Yaakov. And it's certainly realistic that she might have had some kind of an acute personality disorder. The pasuk says, "Vatetze Dena bat Leah." We'll talk about this in a moment, this interesting description of who she is. And Dena, the daughter of Leah, went out. Asher Yaldali Yaakov. It's a very clumsy description of who she is. Lirot bivnot haaretz. Now, in the Torah, you have to focus on anything that is a little bit out of sync, a little bit unusual. Why does it say that she went out to see livnot bivnot haaretz? It should have said lirot bnot haaretz, that she went out perhaps. I mean, she has all her siblings are brothers. She's one of 13 children, 12 boys. So she wants to spend some time with the girls. That's understandable. But the phraseology, this adding this bivnot haaretz, that already is somewhat unusual. So we question, is she there to see the girls, to hang out with the girls, or is she there to be with the girls and see what they wanted to see, basically the boys? And it's already complicated from the very beginning. And her life will become a bizarre story of twists and turns. We'll come back to the story, the incident of what happens to her and the reaction of Shimon and Levi. But let's talk for a moment about what happens to Dena. Ultimately, she will not leave Shechem. After the town is basically massacred, Dena does not want to leave. She fears that she'll be rejected by everyone, even though, again, there's a bit of a dispute. Did she somehow have a part in this? Did she prompt Shechem to take her and have his way with her? Or was she completely innocent? But she felt she would be rejected. So what happens to her? She says, nobody will marry me. I'm tainted. And this, of course, is today we are understanding this more than ever before about the effect that sexual abuse, rape certainly can have on a woman. And she fears nobody will marry her. And who comes along and says, I will marry you? None other than her brother Shimon. Now, of course, you will say, how is that possible? So one opinion is that they lived together, but they never actually had sexual relations. But other opinions say, no, that's not true, that they were in effect married. How could Shimon marry her? Because although first of all, it's prior to the Torah being given. So although there's still a moral restriction on incest, nevertheless, there may be times that in order to do a chesed, that perhaps incest has to be done. Indeed, we'll see without going into it now, another place in the Torah where essentially it refers to incest as a chesed. On that particular pasuk, so we learn that's referring to the fact that when the world was created and Cain and Hevel were born, they were each born with a sister. Well, how will the world be propagated? It takes two to tango. And therefore, they had to have sexual relations with their sister, either their full sister, if they were born as a twin, or the brother's sister, also born as a twin, because that's the tradition. So the Gemara says, yes, it's incest, but it was necessary. And on that's where the Gemara concludes this famous phrase, Olam Chesed Yibaneh, that this world was built because of God's chesed that he did. One of the cheseds that he did was allowing the brother and sister to have sex together. And that's why, to some extent, that word chesed is used also as a synonym for incest. In any case, that's one of the primary ideas of the Medrash, that Shimon married her. We later on in Parshat Vayigash, when it lists Shimon's lineage, so it says Ubnei Shimon. It lists this is in Vayigash Perek Memvav, the 46th Perek and the 10th pasuk. It lists the lineage, and then it has this very strange addition, Shaul ben Haknanit, that one of Shimon's children was Shaul. This is not to be confused with King Shaul. And it says that he is the son of a Canaanite, woman. Who is that? So Chazal say this is a reference to Dena, either because she had a union with Canaanite, Shem. He was a Canaanite, and these people, again, were held in very low regard, or because she was buried in Canaan. So here you have another incident that connects her to, even though it's in hidden fashion, because the Torah sometimes doesn't want to come full out and talk about what happened. It's pasnished. Some want to say she married Eov. And who did they produce? This union, not with Shimon, but with Shem, none other than Osnat, who is the daughter of Shem and Dena. And she ends up marrying Yosef. So it turns out that Yosef will be Dina's brother and her son-in-law. It's obviously a very convoluted situation, but clearly it's indicating some of the trauma that Dena is going through. Now, this phrase, Vatetse Dena bat Leah, Dena went out, identifying her as the child of Leah, Asher Yalda Yaakov, who was born to Yaakov. Again, it's very clumsy. It should have just said, Vatetse Dena bat Yaakov or bat Yaakov Leah. It's kind of unusual. So I want to just examine that in the prism of Yaakov's involvement here. Yaakov really doesn't have much to say during this whole incident. He's there, he's not absent, and he only really speaks up at the end. He knows what happens, and he doesn't really react to it. Yaakov, some people want to hold, is at fault here. First of all, he had no reason to stop in the town of Shechem and to buy land there. He had a divine imperative to return to Beit El and then go to his father living in Hebron, and not to dawdle along the way and hang out in Shechem. And this famous idea, when earlier in the Sedra, when they line up the children, when Yaakov is about to be confronted by Esav, and he puts Dena in a box, because when it lists the children, it skips Dena. Now, it's not doing that just because she's a woman, because Rashi says, V'hechan Dena, where was Dena? And makes this amazing statement that Dena was hidden away in some kind of a container, a box, so that Esav would not lay eyes on her and say, I'd like to marry her. Well, says Rashi there, that Yaakov was punished for doing this. And everybody asks, why would he be punished? If Esav was really such a despicable person and an evil person, Yaakov should be rewarded for hiding Dena and preventing Esav from seeing her and possibly taking her, maybe even by force, to marry him. But the Chazal say that what Yaakov did was not an act of chesed to save Dena. It was really something done to the detriment of Esav, because the key, Esav was indeed a very difficult character. But Yitzchak recognized that Esav could have tremendous potential and could change the world because he had great strength and he had certain things that he was great at. And that was Yitzchak's idea, at least according to some of the sources. He wasn't totally blinded as to who Esav was. But the key to making a mensch out of a person is the woman. And that could have happened if Leah had married Esav, which was the original plan. 4 matriarchs, 4 patriarchs, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Esav, with Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. I mean, that they just come together. But it didn't happen that way. Leah protested. She had a vision that she would have these tribes only with Yaakov, etc. But she had the DNA and the ability to bring the best out of Esav. If she couldn't do it, then her daughter had the same DNA. And this is what should have happened in a more perfect world, that Dena should have married Esav. And this phrase, Vatetse Dena, Dena went out. So that's, Rashi immediately brings the connection with Leah, because it also says by Leah, Vatetse Leah. When did Leah go out? When Reuven found the Dudaim, and Leah appealed, which had an aphrodisiacal quality, and said, Rachel said, I'm trying to get pregnant. Please let me have those Dudaim, whatever they were, in English, mandrakes. We don't really know what it was. And Leah said, okay, I'll give that to you, but I'll trade you. I will trade you the Dudaim for the right to be together with Yaakov on at least 2 nights when he's supposed to be with you. So when Yaakov heads for Rachel's tent, it says, Vatetse Leah. Leah goes out and meets him and says, not so fast, Yaakov. You're not going to my sister. Tonight you're coming to me. And from these 2 unions, Leah gets pregnant with none other than Zvulun and Yisachar, which obviously 2 of the celebrated tribes. So Rashi says that there's a connection between Vatetse Leah and Vatetse Dena, but Rashi adds and says that she was a Afi Yatzanit. Now, Yatzanit, most people translate, including ArtScroll, as meaning someone who is outgoing, who is not shy and withdrawn, from the word yatzad, to go out. And then says, this is why we say, or this is the mashal, ke'ima kabita, like mother, like daughter. But I suggest that the correct translation of yatzanit is not a negative, not somebody who's too out there, but it means someone who can bring the best out of someone else, lahotzi, that they had this quality. And that's what Dena could have done, but Yaakov frustrates that and prevents that by hiding her. And for that, he's punished, because Chazal say he didn't do it for the benefit of Dena. He did it to prevent Esav from reaching his fullest potential, maybe because that would make Yaakov look even worse for having taken the Bechorah away and, in a sense, alienating Esav from the family. So it's somewhat complicated, certainly, but Dena is judged to be someone with very good qualities, someone who, yes, she is outgoing, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, says that he sees her as a prototype of female leadership in a very positive sense. Maybe the first one in the Torah who demonstrates that she actually has the ability to change people, because in a sense, she changes Shechem, that it seems rather than him simply abusing and losing her and discarding her, he comes, Shechem, and he seems to be, in a sense, reformed. He says, I love her. I'll do whatever, I have to do for her, including the whole story of becoming circumcised and telling everybody else to be circumcised, and we'll make an accommodation with the Israelites. So this is, to some extent, this is the product of Dena being able to accomplish this. But unfortunately, this is another mistake that was made. We see a number of mistakes made by the Avot and Imahot. The way that Rachel, the way that Sarah treats Hagar, and which has a connection to the slavery in Egypt, because Hagar was mistreated and she was an Egyptian, etc. And this, according to some, was a mistake as well. So it's interesting. Yaakov in the beginning says nothing. Dena says nothing. You don't see any statement by Dena. Some people want to say, well, sexual abuse can traumatize you and silence you. And so we understand that now. I want to switch for a moment to the second part of the story, where Shimon and Levi massacre the town. And it's interesting because I received an email yesterday that some people may get from Torah Mitzion. It's a very fine Duvar Torah, which basically condemns Shimon and Levi, but mostly Levi. And indeed, it is true that at the end of his life, Yaakov will criticize Shimon and Levi for what they did, because it was underhanded and it was clearly a plot to weaken the people by being circumcised, and then after 3 days coming in and wiping them out. So Yaakov will criticize them, and he will say, among other things, Shimon and Levi Achim, they were brothers in violence. And then he says, Achalkeim b'Yaakov afitzeim b'Yisrael. This is what Yaakov, quote unquote, blesses them before he dies. I will divide them among Israel, or among the tribes, and I will place them. That's why they're not getting any specific place, any Yerusha, any Nachala, any inheritance of any specific area. They're spread out among the Jewish people. Yet we see that at the end of the day, God counteracts and contradicts what Yaakov says. And Hashem says in Parshat Ekev, he says about Levi, Ein lo chelik b'nachala im achav. It's true, they have no portion like the other brothers. Ki Hashem hu nachalato. God is their portion. And indeed, the fact that they're split up in 48 different cities, these cities of the Leviim, it's specifically so they can influence the entire nation. Because from Levi come the spiritual leaders, right? From Aaron will come the Kohanim, but from Moshe and the other Leviim will come spiritual leadership. And that's what the nation needs. So there Hashem says, Yaakov, you can be angry and you can condemn them, even in a sense to curse them, but I will reverse that and I'll make it into a bracha. So I think it's important to understand what's going on here, that, and this relates also, without getting into it now, about the addition of a name, not the change of a name, but the addition of the name Yisrael. So Yaakov, in a sense, has two personas. If we see Yaakov as an individual who is concerned about what his reputation will be, because after all, Yaakov doesn't condemn the act of Shimon and Levi, but he says that, how am I going to live among my neighbors after you've done this? It's going to make life very, very difficult for me. He says, I'm not that big of a nation. They'll get together and they'll go after me. You've made me a very unsavory character by this underhanded act. And it's going to, the consequences will be very disastrous for me, he says. So on that basis, yes, he has a right to be angry. But if he is more the persona of Yisrael, which means the leader of a nation, then he has to see this differently, that the act of Shechem is really an act of war. It's an affront not only to him, but to the entire Jewish people. And therefore, the brothers say to him in describing what happened, they sum it up very, very succinctly. And they said, Nivala asa b'Yisrael. They have committed an outrage, not just in the family, the personal family of Yaakov, but against the people of Israel to do this. I say it's always tantamount. Dena was not just Yaakov's daughter; she was a princess, and if you attacked her, you were attacking all of Am Yisrael. It would be tantamount to kidnapping and repeatedly raping Queen Elizabeth. You imagine what would be the response if that would be done? It would be a war crime. It would be all of England would rise up in tremendous zeal to conquer and wipe out any city or city-state that committed that kind of an outrage against their queen. And therefore, everybody seems to agree that what Shimon and Levi did was justified, in that the city of Shechem acquiesced in this kidnap and rape of Dena without standing up and doing anything about it. And therefore, they were culpable and they were guilty. The only question is, should it have been done in a different way? But the fact that, and without even getting into the details, because Dena was definitely abused, Rashi says it was not just the usual form of sex, but it was all other types of unnatural sex. So that's why the bottom line of the brothers at the end of the story, and they have the last word, and they say to Yaakov, after he complains, this is going to really ruin make it hard to live with the neighbors. What do they say in 4 words? Hakazona ya'aset achotenu. Would you turn our sister into a prostitute? In other words, this is an affront not only on a personal level, but to the nation as a whole. And I want to suggest, because we're running out of time, I want to suggest that in a sense, this story, which is very deep and which has a lot of very fascinating ramifications to it, and the whole concept of following the trail of history and where this will go and what it will lead to, but it's making a comment about terrorism. Shechem, of course, is the Avi Avot, the most intense and the center of terrorism in Israel. So not much has changed. Shechem although it has a very, very important place in Jewish history, and it is where God first appears to the Avot, and we say that it's this place where Yosef seeks his brothers in Shechem, and at the end of the day, it will play an important part ultimately in Jewish history. That's why we say that we will, in a sense, achieve the Geula Bishchem, in Shechem, because the initials of Bishchem spell out Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto. So without going into it's a whole other shiur about Shechem. For our family, it has its own, obviously, its own special place, let us say, because that's where Ari was killed, Hashem Yikom Damo, in Shechem. But Shechem was and remains, and it was also, by the way, one of the Arei Miklat. It was one of the cities of refuge where many murderers lived. So it's always been associated with violence and with murder. But in a sense, I suggest that what's Shimon and Levi are saying here, in their not just defense of their sister, but in their standing up on behalf of the nation, is that this is how we have to view terrorism. When a Jew, God forbid, is struck, then certainly in Israel and wherever it happens, it's not just an attack on that individual personally, but that attacks everything we stand for. And that really is an affront against God himself. And it threatens all of us. It threatens our way of life and life itself. So the reaction that we have to terrorism, it's not just an individual act. These are people who are essentially declaring war on the Jewish people, one victim at a time. And you can't just regard it as something that happens disconnected from the bigger picture. You have to look at it that this is a culture or a ideology that is attacking the Jewish people itself via these individual acts of terrorism. And therefore, Shimon and Levi understood that, and they said, we cannot treat this like a petty crime. This is, in a sense, a declaration of war, as I said, no different than if a country or a city or a group would kidnap, and I think, Queen Elizabeth would be the best example, and do what they did to Dena, and perhaps even kill her, then obviously an entire nation would stand up against it. So I think, in a sense, that's a message being sent here. And although Yaakov doesn't like how it turned out and the methods that were used, Levi, who is always known to be passionate and stand up for the defense of the Jewish people, has the last word when he tells his own father, we're not going to let this happen and not react in a very comprehensive and violent way. You see this with Moshe Rabbeinu, who was a Levi, who kills the Egyptian. You see this with another Levi. You may not have known he was a Levi, but Shmuel Hanavi. He's also a Levi. And in the story of Shaul and Agag, Shmuel takes out his sword and he basically cuts Agag, the king of Amalek, in half when he tells Shaul, you failed to take action against the entire nation of Amalek. Again, representing this same idea of terrorism. And that is an indication of the passion. They also are the ones who stand up. They don't participate in the sin of the Egel Hazav, and they stand up and they take action against the people who do commit the sin of the Egel Hazav. There's a certain passion that Levi has, and I think it's in the blood, it's in the DNA of Levi, and ultimately they are fighting for the glory of God and the defense of God's presence on earth, and therefore Hashem rewards them and recognizes what they're trying to do, and ultimately says that they are his, in a sense, his representatives. So this is, I think we'll stop here, but there's a lot going on here, as you can see, in a parsha that usually we talk about the confrontation between Yaakov and Esav, and that indeed is a fascinating subject, but we should not overlook the story of Dena, because I think, especially in today's world as well, we see the effect that sexual abuse can have on someone, and the need to stand up and do whatever we can do to prevent it from happening. And to some extent, it's an attack on not just on a individual woman, but it's an attack on a whole ideology of life that says human life is sacred. You can't take somebody's life. You can't abuse somebody. And if you do, you have to pay the price. And I think the world is coming around to that. And Dena was, the story of Dena, it's interesting, should have a very central place in today's culture, because here you see that Shimon and Levi would not just accept it and say, well, maybe she's to blame, that she was a little bit too outgoing and she shouldn't have hung around there. But that's not what happens. And Shem, who perpetrated the crime, he's the one who's held accountable for it. And anyone else who did not protest and stop it, they're also culpable, and they also are punished. So I will stop here. It's a lot to digest, but I think a very fascinating story, both of Dena and also Shimon and Levi. So if you have a comment or question and you want to unmute yourself, we can take a minute or two to hear what you have to say. Anybody want to comment? Hopefully you can unmute yourself, I hope.
Thank you for clarifying why Levi was chosen to lead the people out of Egypt and be, in a sense, a very primary player in the whole tribes of Israel's history, because I never understood that since Levi and Shimon disobeyed their father. I didn't understand why it wasn't Yehuda or someone from
Yeah, Shimon is a little bit of although Levi is the ripe old age of 13 and Shimon is 14 at the time, according to Chazal. So Shimon is older by a year, but Levi is the one who basically is running the show. And although Yaakov castigates Shimon and Levi together, it's Levi who really is the one who was spearheading this entire story. And it's, again, as we said, it's typical of his character. Very passionate, very ready to stand up in defense of God and in defense of truth, justice, and the Jewish way, you might say. So yes, any other comments? Okay, well, if not, then let me just see the chat for a second. If yeah, what should we do to help Dena, of course. So we'll look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same place.
How old was Tamar?
How old was who?
Tamar. She couldn't have been very old if Levi was 13 or 14.
Wait, who are you asking about?
Tamar.
Tamar?
You said that Levi. Yes.
What does Levi have to do with Tamar?
I thought that was the whole thing with Shem. Was this not this week?
No, it was Dena, not Tamar.
I meant Dena.
Oh, how old? Yeah, well, Dena was, again, it's a good question. We don't really know. I don't know how old Dena was at the time. Levi was 13. So Dena was, again, it's hard to judge ages then. They were a lot more mature perhaps than our kids are at 12, 13. Maybe not. Maybe we're more sophisticated today. I don't know. But she was also young, but it's a good question. I don't know that haven't seen anybody actually say how old she was.
But if she was born subsequently, if she was
yeah, clearly she was born after. Of course, she was born after Levi.
Yes.
So she might have been 10 years old, which is a whole other story, whole other crime in terms of a 10-year-old as opposed to somebody of age. But yeah, it's a good point. I'll take a look and see if I can find how old she was.
But then she's also younger than Yehuda.
Yeah, she would be younger, of course, because she's Leah's 7th child. So yes, and even if they're born one after the other, obviously she's young. But you know what? It's hard to think logically, age-wise, throughout the Torah, because there are so many things that we say either they're too young or they're too old. And I think you have to have a certain suspension of disbelief, as they say, when it comes to things about ages. The same is true with Rivka. Was she really married at the age of 3? Was she 12? And there are all kinds of opinions about it. And to some extent, I think you have to kind of just put that on the side and look at the story itself beyond the age factor, because that is very, very confusing.
Do you think that the fact that she left her family and went out into the non-Jewish world, is that a message that we should take, that we don't want our girls and our boys should stay within ourselves so we don't have this kind of a problem? Seems to me if she would have stayed at home, all this wouldn't have happened.
Well, that's exactly what some of the commentators say, that she brought it upon herself by being too outgoing. But again, that's where Yaakov lived. She maybe needed to get out of a house that had 12 brothers. And some want to suggest that she was already trying to be Makarev, these girls of Shechem, that she had it was a meritorious act to try to maybe bring this concept of one God to them, and that she just simply was somebody that, as I said, that the Rebbe says, she had this sense of leadership. I want to go out and I want to do something good for the world. So I will try to influence these girls to maybe consider giving up idolatry and believing in one God. So that's certainly one of the opinions. And maybe in retrospect, you look back and say, well, she overstepped her bounds, etc. And that's certainly one opinion that Rashi and the Art Scroll loves that opinion and says, right off the bat, if you have a copy of the Art Scroll and wants to say that she was excessively outgoing and that it was somewhat immodest what she was doing. But then there are others who say, like the Lubavitcher, who says, well, you have to watch where you're going and you have to maintain a sense of modesty. But that doesn't mean if you have those leadership qualities that you shouldn't go out and do your share in making the world a better place.
Might we say that there's a lesson to be learned about how to deal with the people of Shechem from this episode long ago?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can I say something about Levi? It was interesting you were saying that they are associated with zeal, because I was thinking of Nadav and Avihu, who were also zealous in their service of Hashem. But isn't it also the case that, unlike Shimon, the Leviim became the educators, they became the priests, that they basically, maybe one of the lessons is that you have to channel that. You have to channel that, you have to channel that in such a way that it serves Hashem, because it's almost as if they realized they overstepped the mark and everything went after that into education. And
well, you have to have a certain drive.
And the priesthood.
You have to have a certain drive.
To be the Kohanim.
You have to have a certain drive, different one, you have some of the tribes, Zevulun, they were merchants, and others were into agriculture, and they had other interests.
They didn't have enough halal. They were the priests. They were the Kohanim.
Yeah, but
it's like saying they took that zeal, they took that passion, and put it into something very positive.
It's the other way around, because they had that passion. God said, I'm not going to give you your own portion. I'm going to have you live among all the other tribes, so you can bring that sense of and
what happened with Shimon? So what has happened to Shimon?
Well, nothing.
Where was
Shimon is kind of looked at as a kind of shlemazel of the tribes. So
I won't tell my son-in-law that.
No, I have a son-in-law, Shimon. I have a son-in-law, Shimon, also. Look, all the tribes. I don't want to negate any of that. I take that back because my son-in-law may be listening. So no, but in this case, he kind of followed the lead of Levi more than anything else. But they all, of course, are considered to be the elite of Am Yisrael, the sheep, the tribes of God. So they're all great in their own respect, but with different personalities.
So Jacob was really upset about this, right? Yaakov was
yeah.
Okay, so we find as a result of what they did, what actually happened to the Jewish people from that act?
That's a good question. I think that there is running through the whole history, you see, starting with Abraham, you see that there is antagonism against the Jews, let's call them that, the Israelites, because primarily of them representing a moral code that the world doesn't want. They want might makes right. They want to be able to take what they want if they can get it. And God has a different plan. And the Jews are always looked at as, even to recent times, This is one of the ideas that Hitler proposed and said that he says, I want to be God, I want to make the rules, and the Jews stand in my way because they represent a moral code that I can't live by. And
but what was the actual effect of what Yaakov was all upset? What do we see? I don't see anything in the Torah that says because they did it, a whole bunch of countries jumped on them and tried to kill them, and nothing. It's zero.
Correct.
So
we don't see
it. That's a great message. That's a great message. If we're going to be a light to the world, we have to be a light to the world and not worry about what other people think about us, because all that does is lead us into nothing. Whereas what we did is we destroyed a nation in Shechem, which was evil to the core to do what they were doing. And we didn't have anything happen wrong to us afterwards.
Yeah,
I think that's an important message.
Your point is very well taken. And even though it seems when we react strenuously against terrorism that the world condemns us, nevertheless, we should be very, very open in saying that this is a scourge around on the whole world. And we're doing the world a favor by trying to rid the world of terrorism. Do you like bombings going off indiscriminately? Do you like planes being hijacked? We're fighting against this really to your benefit. And that really is the posture that we have to take, even if that we'll get a lot of opposition to it. So I think your point is well taken. And here we don't really see that maybe Yaakov was overreacting when he said that, how will I live among my neighbors? But
that's what we have now.
That's based upon some other how shall I put it? Some other issues that Yaakov had in terms of, is he someone who is underhanded, or is he? I think he would have felt better if this would have been an open conflict instead of introducing the whole subterfuge of the circumcision, which is something that made him look like he's just an underhanded person. So that's, I think, more Yaakov's complaint than anything else.
Can I say something?
Yeah. What'd you say?
I wanted
what, Gila?
I wanted to say that why did Shimon and Levi come up with the circumcision subterfuge? Why not say, let's fast for 3 days, show us, and then they'd be weak too. But what happened when they circumcised themselves is they turned into Jews, and the world didn't give a damn.
Yeah, that's the joke about it. Yeah, no, the question's a good question, because they could have come up with other plans, but maybe there is a connection to that, to say that, maybe his first thing was he's going to challenge them. Maybe he didn't expect that they would actually say, okay, we'll do it. And then when they did say, we'll do it, then they said, oh, well, what are we going to do now? And that's why I'm saying they might have actually had, that's what the Rebbe is saying, that maybe there was an opportunity here that maybe they could be reached, because they preach and say, let's do what they say and let's somehow come together. Of course, in the end of the day, we don't necessarily even want that, because we have our own culture and we're not looking to convert people. But maybe they were somewhat sincere, and that might have been a lost opportunity. And as we know, it's all in the family. Most of our enemies, the most bitter enemies we have, are family members, whether they come from Esav or whether they come from Yishmael, whoever it may be. We're all related to them, and we make mistakes along the way. And we have to choose our battles very carefully. And in this case, I think Levi is, when all is said and done, he's vindicated. And we do see this streak still in Shechem to this day. And maybe Levi realized that they're not going to be sincere, that this, whatever, even if they do go through with the circumcision, it's only ultimately for the purpose of taking us over, and eventually there'll be a war between us anyway. So it's hard to say and predict, but I think that it takes a long time, but ultimately God vindicates Levi for what he did. And instead of removing him from a position of leadership, actually elevates his leadership and says, you're going to be my representative in trying to reach the people and to unite the people under Torah. Shabbat shalom to everybody, and thank you for coming. See you next week.
Wait, one more second. We have
I wanted to ask,
lady
there
in the
was a
balcony.
case,
Yes.
there was a case where one of our forefathers put his daughter in a basket to hide her.
Yeah, that's this. That's Dena.
Dena, when they went where?
When Yaakov confronted Esav, that he hid Dena from Esav. That's what we talked about in the Shiur. So if you missed that part, play that over, because that's a big part of what we said tonight. See everybody soon. Shabbat shalom, Barach.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye.